The Summer Games Minute, brought to you by Mass Mutual. For most professional athletes, versatility means they can play a few different positions in a single sport. For Babe Dietrichson-Zaharias, versatility means dominance across the entire spectrum of sport. In the 1932 Summer Games in Los Angeles, Zaharias won gold in the 80-meter hurdles and the javelin throw, plus she got a silver in the high jump. Running, throwing, jumping wasn't enough for Babe, so she became a competitive billiards player, then jumped into professional golf, winning 10 major championships, all the while making a few pitching appearances in Major League Baseball spring training games. Mass Mutual understands the nuances in how women want and need to manage their finances. With quality product solutions and guidance, a Mass Mutual financial professional can help you plan for both short-term and long-term money goals. Learn more and get started at massmutual.com.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/MBO. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Trojan Condoms. Experience more with Trojan Bearskin Raw, America's thinnest latex condom among leading brands. Enjoy triple-tested Trojan quality with a natural feel for your most thrilling adventure yet. Trojan Raw is also available in non-latex, designed to increase body heat transfer between partners. Trojan Bearskin Raw. Let's go. Tap the banner to buy now.
The Athletic.
One test down, one to go, and then the 2024 MotoGP season will begin. So who is heading to next week's 2 days of Qatar running feeling confident, and who needs a big test at Lusail to settle some nerves and solve some problems? This is the Race MotoGP podcast. I'm Matt Beer, and I've located Simon Patterson, who's actually in his house for what might be the last time for a little while, and the first time in about a month. He looks genuinely delighted with that. That's lovely. And I've prized Val Khorounzhiy away from F1 launches for some MotoGP chat. We covered a lot of ground on last week's podcast after the opening test in Malaysia, but there were plenty more topics we wanted to get onto, and some of them have been further illuminated by what's happened at team launches this week, because teams have continued launching the bikes that we saw in Valencia and in Malaysia already, and they've brought them out in fancy launches, some with very new colours, some with exactly the same colours. So launch season is as puzzling as ever on that front. But one team that did actually hold its launch this week is also the centre of a bit of I'm going to say rider confusion. I think I'm very confused about what KTM is intending to do with its 2025 lineup already. One of its quartet notably struggled at the test. We spent a lot of time talking about how great Pedro Acosta was at the first test, but his Tech 3 Gas teammate Augusto Fernandez looked all at sea. Val, Simon, we've said a lot of good things about Fernandez last year when he was the series sole rookie and doing very well under the radar, but he did not have a good start to 2024, did he? And as much as KTM is making noises like it's not going to look outside its lineup, it's surely going to.
Yeah, Fernandez's form in the Sepang test was very, very concerning throughout, and none of the explanations he has offered up are particularly good for allaying said concerns. We know he's a bit of a slow burn rider who takes a little bit to adapt. We saw at the start of last season, his rookie season, that he basically needed the entire testing run-in to get to a reasonable level. And once he was there, he'd had a good season, but he wasn't, the Pedro Acosta plug-and-play, immediately fast type of performer. And he hasn't really mentioned it, but I am guessing that the switch to the carbon chassis that obviously Tech 3 Gas did not have at the end of last season, but the Works KTM team did, but now everybody has. I think that must have scrambled something on his side of the garage. He's described it as having lost basically half of the test to sort of weird tweaks and alterations, but he's never really found any semblance of anything in terms of being competitive. I would argue. You look at his headline lap time, and we do know that he did try a time attack, and he's on 58 56 or 7 or something like that. He was 58.1 in qualifying last year. So that's over half a second in a test where everybody else was breaking pole records for fun and, really taking in the extra grip. We know Augusto Fernandez is maybe not the best rider on the grippiest track. He likes low grip, he likes used tires. On the used tires, he's more competitive, but this is an insane chasm to have right now. It's crazy. It's what, 1.3 or 4 to Pedro? How does that happen? You can't. So that has to be alarming coming into the season.
And the thing that his struggles really highlight to me straight away. Now, in some ways, I was thinking Fernandez is quite a low-profile rider. We don't almost need to talk about him for quite a way into the season relative to all the other people who are out there. But with the rider market being what it is, anyone showing any weakness is straight away going to be thinking, oh my gosh, there's so many riders out of contract. I've got to sort this out because deal's going to be done any second. And KTM is a team that has talked about expanding its lineup and seems to have decided it won't or can't now, has been linked to Marc Marquez again and again and again, has made some noises about not wanting to look outside its current quartet, and then seemingly sort of rode back from that in this week alone. The difference in tone between the Tech 3 launch and the KTM launch felt to me quite different on that front. So, Simon, I feel like everyone at KTM who isn't Pedro Acosta and Brad Binder should be looking over their shoulder pretty nervously going into this season and not really listening too much to what Pit Buyer is saying because it seems to be quite inconsistent. What do you reckon?
I mean, if there's one lesson we've learned in recent years about the KTM rider market, it's that you ignore everything that their management is saying about everything because it generally turns out to be, at the very least, mistruths, if not straight up lies, because they've thrown riders repeatedly under the bus. Even this week again during the team launches, something we'll come to a little bit later, they've done it to another rider. They've promised him something and already have failed to deliver on it. It is just what they do. It is the fundamental weakness of that team right now that they just seem to be really bad at managing riders. It's like 2016, 2017 Aprilia all over again, except they've got a really good bike now so they can get away with it because there's always someone, there's someone coming through the ranks and there's a fast bike. So you riders forgive because they'll take the opportunity. But, we talked not that long ago about how Pedro Acosta should feel uncomfortable about going to KTM given that they absolutely screwed one of his best mates in the paddock, Remy Gardner. It's just the way they do business. I think that there's no one apart from Binder who has a contract and Acosta who has proven already after one test that he is the superstar we thought he was going to be. Those two are safe. But Augusto Fernandez absolutely has to know that he isn't, as does Jack Miller at this point, because you got to think that Acosta is eyeing up a factory seat, and that's Miller's spot. They're not going to move Miller back to Tech 3. Val's looking at me quizzically, but I can't see it. Because KTM generally, they use you and they burn you.
So I disagree on that particular front. I think that is actually a potential explanation. I think Miller would maybe not accept a move to Tech 3 GasGas, but I think that would be floated. And I think that maybe explains what we've all noticed as a certain mismatch of tone between Pure Mobility Group Motorsport boss Pit Buyer, who of course oversees both the KTM side and the GasGas side, and Francesco Guidotti, who is effectively the team manager of the KTM team. You listen to Pit Buyer talk and the messaging is pretty clear. However much you believe it or not, that KTM and GasGas do not want to be like front runners in the rider market for 2025, that their first priority is just making sure that they can keep the intact lineup of 4 riders over 4 bikes, that they're not going to try to rock the boat. Whether you believe it or not, it's different. And if Augusto Fernandez is actually at the level that he's been at Sepang, they can't keep him, unfortunately, but I don't think he will be. So hopefully this has just been So
the other thing that I am slightly wary about here is that KTM generally struggle in testing.
Yeah.
And the factory guys weren't exactly lighting things up in this test either. So my one sort of thing for Fernandez's future is that maybe there's more on show here. Maybe there's more to come than what we saw in this test, because they were genuinely testing while everyone else was throwing tires at a sticky track, like you said. And I know they did time attacks and that, but it wasn't why they were in Sepang, which is, I think that stands out fairly starkly compared to everyone else. Yeah. I don't know whether that's the real, truth behind Fernandez's abilities, or lack of them, from what we saw. But it is something we've seen with KTM before, where they go to Sepang, they struggle, and then they turn up to the start of the season really strong.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that is something we need to consider, certainly for Brad Binder in particular, I think. But I don't know, like, Augusto, just a bit too far away for even that to be, I think, a comfortable explanation. He did not sound comfortable or happy with anything that was going on. Like, every time you saw him and every time you relayed what he looked like and every time I saw what he looked like, you could tell is not comfortable. But I do think, just going back to that mismatch between Guidotti and Byrer's rhetoric that they want to keep things as unchanged as possible, and Guidotti's suggestion recently, specifically, he appeared on MotoGP.com and he was talking about how he phrased it how Jack Miller needs to behave more this season than ever before, and he doesn't necessarily mean teamwork, he means something else, and it's hard to zero in on, but basically he was really accentuating it as a season in which Miller needs to really reach a new level of consistency. And I don't want to say application, because I don't think the effort is in question, but just certain things about how he goes about business and his mental side that Guidotti is really urging him to improve. And he does not sound as convinced in the Miller package as it is right now, as you would take from Byrer's chat about how they don't want to change anything. And I think what this sets up to me, and I might be wrong, but there's historical precedent. I think they want Acosta on the oranges next year. That's very logical to me. And I think if that does happen, then they would potentially offer Miller the same way they did to Miguel Oliveira when they were dropping him from the lineup to make space for Miller. They offered Miguel Oliveira a Tech 3 deal. He rejected it, but it was on record as being offered. But he just, he couldn't stomach the idea of being demoted, effectively. I think that's, like, I would not be shocked at all if the same offer is coming Jack Miller's way if the start of the season plays out like testing has looked. In fact, that is 100% what I see happening. I think that's the likeliest outcome, provided performance patterns stay as they are.
I could see Miller being pragmatic enough to accept that as well, given that I don't... With no offence meant to Jack Miller, who I genuinely think is an excellent rider and deserves his Grand Prix wins, I still really rate Jack Miller, while finding him frustrating in execution terms. But I don't see Jack Miller going to another factory now. I think Ducati and KTM is him done in MotoGP factory terms, but he could still make a really good satellite contribution with his experience and his ability. And he's always struck me, like when he settled into being a number 2 to Pecco Bagnaia quite readily, well, not readily as such, but more pragmatically than other riders might have done. He kind of knows where he can fit in and wants to keep making a good living in this championship. So I could see him saying yes more readily than, say, Oliveira would have done in that circumstance.
I don't. I see him as someone who has to travel a long way away from home to come racing, who doesn't like being away from Australia, who has a new kid, who will see the offer as a bit of a slight, and who will find a new home in the World Superbike paddock where he can immediately go back to winning races. I think that's Jack's future. I think I can see him being the successor to Alvaro Bautista in the factory Ducati World Superbike team, and being as well paid as he would be as a satellite MotoGP rider, with literally half the number of weekends away from home.
And a huge amount of race wins, I would imagine, as well. I can see him fitting into that very well.
But I think it is important for us, like, this has only been the first preseason test, and it is important for us to highlight that KTM is weird in testing, and it is very important for us to point out that, again, its mantra this year has been that, they've just been trying bits and pieces and combinations of packages and not really zeroing in on one thing that they're refining, which means that the lap times from their riders have been in a sense obscured, especially the peak lap times. I don't know how much of a qualifying run Miller has really done. Like, his 58.3 isn't particularly impressive on paper. But we also were here last year when, he wasn't too good in testing in Portimao. He did not impress me at all. And then come first round, he was quick. He was really quick. It is a question of how he'll compare to Acosta more than anything, but also, of course, Binder. Binder, I think, has the chance to begin the season in really good form. You wouldn't see it maybe from the combined times, right? But I think he didn't do a proper qualifying simulation at the right time at Sepang. I think he missed, the day 3 window for one reason or another. They just didn't prioritize it. His day 2 time was really good. If you knock off a few tenths off of that, it's serious. It could be really quite something. And especially given what we saw Costa do over one lap, I still expect Binder to have a few tenths more in his pocket. I think he could be really competitive from the get-go in Qatar. Qatar and KTM have such a weird relationship. But, they can be quick there. They've proven it with Binder. I guess it's about consistency of track-to-track performance, but I think they have sort of been talking of themselves as title contenders, and I do see it. Maybe against the Ducati Armada, it's a long shot, but I do see it more than I've ever seen it before. And I should also correct myself. I was looking at the wrong timesheet. It was a 57.8 for Miller, not a 58.3, so better, but still, not in the context of this test, not amazing.
You know we love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right, you could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
We'll get back to the pod in a moment, but first of all, let me tell you about Grammarly. Email, Google Docs, Slack, you write across multiple platforms and places during your workday, so delivering consistent, high-quality communication everywhere is key. Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you get work done faster with high-quality writing for better projects, proposals, presentations, and more. Best of all, Grammarly works where you work, so you can get more done no matter what tools you use. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. Get AI writing support that works where you work. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast. Easier said, done.
So we just mentioned Marc Marquez very, very briefly there as the potential KTM 2025 contender. We're not going to talk about Marc Marquez much in this episode because in the next episode, next week, we're talking to him. Marc Marquez is going to be our special guest on the next episode of the Race MotoGP podcast at the start of next week before the Qatar test. And we're giving you listeners the chance to put some of your questions to him. We won't have time for loads. We always get inundated when we do listener questions episodes, and Mark won't be able to spare as much time as we can to answer everything. But if you've got a question you'd like to put to Marquez, send it to podcast@the-race.com, either in text form or as a voice note, and we will select a few of the very best to put to Mark when Simon sits down to chat with him in the next few days. And you can hear that episode on all the usual podcast places from the race on Monday next week. So moving on from Marquez and 2024 to the team Marquez left behind, Repsol Honda held its launch this week as well. Now, we're talking about teams and riders with lots to prove in testing. Actually, from everything we've seen so far, Honda is already proving quite a bit post-Marquez, and hopefully will continue to do that in Qatar next week. But its launch was extremely striking for one thing, the colour. We knew something might be changing on the livery, and oh my gosh, it really did change. Val, you were very struck by this, and I loved your analogy of, how do you put it? Normally, a Repsol Honda livery reveal is like closing your eyes and then revealing your own living room. Yeah. This was not the case. This was different, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I think there's some dispute over whether it can be described as a shock or not, given the Repsol colors are still there. If you look at the underside of the side fairing of the bike, there's your familiar Repsol. It's been moved away. Squashed for what everyone reports and or assumes and or both are financial, contractual reasons to do with Marc's departure and how much money Repsol is pumping in and how much Honda wants to give him prominence on the bike that has been their bike, Repsol's bike, for years and years and years and years. It's an interesting looking machine. It's like multiple liveries in one, and I don't think it's garish, but it's certainly it's a striking thing to look at. If you look at it at the front, you don't recognize it as a Repsol Honda bike at all. Just doesn't look like a Repsol Honda bike. Looks like something else entirely. Looks like, I don't know, a CRT thing or something. If you look at it from the side, well, I don't think
you're right. You're right.
So that's now blacklisted from Honda.
I don't think it's a bad livery. I quite like it. I think they've done a decent job combining a lot of really visual elements, but I don't think it looks like what you'd expect a factory bike to look like. I think they're all very primary color, familiar motive in MotoGP right now. Save for maybe KTM, and even then I'd say KTM falls under that rule. And this bike looks like, I don't know, if AR46 came out with this color scheme, that would make a lot of sense to me. In fact, it is kind of a little bit similar to some of their stuff. It's basically this really weird, but cool, but weird marriage between their Honda Racing Corporation blue and red, and it's darker blue, but blue, and the Repsol color. And the thought I had today, and it's such a weird thought to have, but I'll share it anyway. Man, Luca Marini signed up to ride an iconic Repsol colors, and his bike does not look like a Repsol Honda bike. So that's kind of, at least Paul Espargo got his chance to have pictures taken of him on a Repsol bike. I don't know, but it's a fine livery. I'm not being mean. I'm sorry if I am.
I mean, Joan Mir is living out all of his Valentino Rossi fantasies because he's somehow ended up riding a navy blue, orange and white Repsol Honda bike with a fluorescent yellow helmet and gloves that looks like 2002 Valentino Rossi. It is uncanny. And you have to think, like, Marini's looking at the other side of the garage and thinking, damn, I missed a trick here. Like, it could have looked like my big brother and I didn't. But I like it. There's a lot going on with it, but I'm really happy they did something different. It's got plenty of legacy cues in it as well, not just to the Rossi era, but I think there's, that navy blue is a real Dune tribute to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Repsol sponsorship. The only bit of it that I really don't like is the weird random sections of exposed black carbon fiber that just don't really fit in with the aesthetic of the rest of the bike. It just seems like a random other color combination to add to the mix. But yeah, it's never going to please all of us. But I like it. I'm glad it's different. I feel sorry for the fuel station owners of Spain, who will have like a gazillion Repsol Honda. When you go to a Repsol fuel station in Spain, you can buy Repsol Honda model bikes, but you can also buy like commemorative towels and wipes for cleaning the inside of your car and screen wash and all sorts of things that have this bike on it that now isn't this bike. So that's going to be a fairly significant shake-up for them.
I'm staring at it right now, and I don't really care about being mean. I hate it. Yesterday, so we were recording this Wednesday morning. So Tuesday morning, when it was released, I noticed Repsol Honda tweeting iconic past Repsol bikes. First, I was like, "Oh, if you're going to change the livery, don't be doing that now, because you're just going to draw attention to this icon having vanished." And sure enough, it went from here's the iconic Repsol livery to here's a livery that says Repsol's not giving us as much money anymore. It was, it's too much of a. I actually love the HRC colours that Stefan Bradl's been running as the additional rider. I love the red and blue. I think that's really smart. I don't know if I necessarily like Repsol Orange, but it is iconic and it's in your brain. And this is just one sort of squished through the other to me. Doesn't work.
I've had another look at it, and I've realized that my entire opposition to it is the black carbon fiber. And if they painted that white, it would then look like the best of everything that I wanted this bike to be. So that's my opposition. On the bigger picture about the financial commitment, I don't actually think Repsol are giving them any less money. I think that Repsol are giving Marc Marquez less money. And that's what's changed here. I don't think that there's probably not less investment from them in terms of, building a bike. But there's been all sorts of stories over the years about the things that Repsol Honda have done financially for Marc Marquez to keep him a part of the team, and to keep him Spanish resident whenever a lot of his colleagues have went to Andorra for tax purposes. There has been a huge financial investment into the Marc Marquez project from Repsol as much as into the Honda project. And I think that, their bottom line is probably feeling his departure quite nicely, but I think Honda probably don't have any less budget to spend on making this bike what it needs to be again.
I should say, the livery is very busy, lots of colors, but they are quite lucky that at least Red Bull has followed Marquez out, because imagine this livery and also a Red Bull logo somewhere on it. Then it would be the worst thing ever put to screens. Like this, I think it's all right.
Yeah, I'm struggling to fit a bull's face on there as well, definitely. I was really interested in how this launch came across, not just the livery, but the whole vibe of it, because I said this to you guys the other day. This felt like Honda's first post-superstar launch in years, and that is a bit unfair to Joan Mir, who was, of course, 2020 world champion. But in terms of the names Honda's had for so long, I can't remember. You have to go back a long way to get this low-key a Honda lineup. And it's not just the lineup, it's the expectations. Even when Honda has had 2 non-title winning riders, which I can't even think when that happened.
Pedrosa Hayden? No, Hayden. Yeah, Pedrosa Hayden.
Yes, no, in Hayden's champion. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, in Hayden's championship. Yeah, you're right. Even then, the bike was competitive enough that you had the expectation that it would be fighting for wins at least, and its riders would be up the front. Now it's got riders who the general public haven't necessarily heard of, and a bike that's not going to be fighting for podiums. So it's got so much less to shout about at a launch. But it feels like Honda's going about stuff in the right way. It's not making false claims or big promises. It's been very clear this is a rebuilding era. It's got a bunch of hard-working riders in to do some rebuilding, and that's what it's cracking on with. And fair play to that in the end. I think you're both going to agree with me on that. So I've made your point. Made your points redundant.
We're being very helpful co-hosts by you're leaving silence in for us to go. Yeah, exactly, and we're instead just nodding.
Disagree with me. Come on, fight me.
Yeah.
But the way you put it, actually, Val, was it's not the Honda of the past. It's not the Honda of the glory days. But actually, in this circumstance, that's a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. Because again, the path they have been walking has stopped working pretty obviously, and it was showing signs of stopping working in like 2019 basically, which was an upsettingly good year in every sense. But you could see the cracks, and you could see how much it depended on one rider. And of course then, what is it, Murphy's Law? I don't know, I forgot for some reason. But then that rider gets injured, and immediately everything goes off the rails, and the wins stop coming, and the podiums stop coming. And sooner or later you have to tear it down and start again. And that's why even before the Marc Marquez exit was confirmed, I strongly felt that it could be quite a good thing for Honda in many regards. And once it's back to goodness, he'll be back. I mean, I think that feels very, very likely that he'll be back sooner or later. Alberto Puig, the team boss, was asked during the launch by one of the attendant journalists, is Marc coming back? In 2025, I think the question was. And Puig was immediately like, I'm going to be frank with you, I don't know. It's a very Alberto Puig answer. I don't think he was ever going into like PR platitudes. If we're focused on our 2 current riders, blah, blah, blah. Like the best thing you could do is cut it off immediately. I did find it really funny that Joan Mir turned right at him and was like looking at his shoulder, like right at Puig as Puig was giving that answer. It gave a very funny visual also, because Luca Marini was staring straight on, the 1,000-yard stare that he does sometimes. I am reading way too much into it, but remember, Luca Marini has a 2025 deal with Honda. Joan Mir does not. So if Marc Marquez comes in contractually, logically, it would be at the expense of Joan Mir. But obviously, contractually, MotoGP.
I was going to say, contractually plus logically, Luca Marini is riding a Repsol Honda this year. And,
exactly.
Which I think he'll do well at. But I mean, in terms of logic and expectations, this is way off what we were thinking was going to happen until 2 days before it happened.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, Marc is. That answer suggests to me strongly that Marc is coming back. It's just a question of the rate of the bike development. It's either 25 or 27, I guess.
Simon, you should ask him.
Yeah,
maybe on the podcast.
Yeah, why don't we? I mean, I it's a completely unfounded, baseless conspiracy theory, but I am certain that the reason they let him go is because he's got some sort of a handshake agreement that he will honor the missing year from his contract that he broke at some point in the future. I think it's just a given that he's coming back at this point from like everything he says and does. He's talking about it as if, oh yeah, no, yeah, that's probably going to happen. The team are talking about it as if, oh yeah, no, that's probably going to happen. It's wild. We've heard Marc Marquez announcing openly at the launch of his new team that he wants to go back to Honda in the near future. And we've heard the boss of Repsol Honda announce at the launch of his new riders that he wants to take Marc Marquez back in the near future. Like, that's got to be unprecedented.
But I think I should say here, and this might be an example that Mark would appreciate, but probably the listeners of the podcast are absolutely not interested in. When Leo Messi was leaving Barcelona, you know, the tearful press conference, everybody super sad. Everybody wanted him to stay, but the money just didn't work out. Everybody was certain he'll be back sooner or later. It's been a few years. He isn't back. He has not returned. He is seeing out his career elsewhere. He'll be back in some capacity someday, but again, there is still every chance that just as the timelines were wrong, that they will still never be quite right. That by the time Honda is what it wants to be, it either has its new rider to prioritize and build around, or Mark's just done competitively. He's just, you know, he's maybe gotten just that enough bit less competitive to where it doesn't fire him up anymore as much as it needs to for him to really commit himself to MotoGP every single year. Because I think he's always been open that he will not go as long as Valentino Rossi, but he even probably not anywhere near as long as Valentino Rossi. So yeah, I think the intention from everybody sounds like, you know, we'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but the thing is, the where and when might be post-riding career.
Disagree. Hard disagree.
Yeah, Simon's shaking his head really. Anyway, we're going to settle it. Simon's going to ask Mark. He'll tell us on the podcast. It's sorted.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/MBO. Terms and conditions apply.
Let's go back to another rider who is going to go into the second test with a little bit of work to do. We talked about a lot of Ducatis doing very well in the last podcast, but we didn't talk a lot about Marco Bezzecchi at VR46. Now, Bezzecchi made a point of staying at VR46 and moving on to a 2023 Ducati when the chance was there for him to go to Pramac and be on 2024. Year-old Ducatis have worked out very well for a lot of people in the past, but are there signs that Bez isn't gelling, especially with this one, Val?
Yeah, a little bit, and it's been a fairly consistent thread through all of his media appearances after various testing days. A little bit after Valencia, and definitely at Sepang, that he's just not yet as comfortable with the GP23, as good as that bike is, as he would like to be. And you know, the headline times also reflected. I mean, his best time from the test was a 57.8. He can go quicker than that. I think that's pretty obvious. Not without really even, I think, making much in the way of improvements. But he's been crashing a fair bit. He's been openly talking about how he just hasn't found his groove with the bike yet. I think his longer runs also haven't really matched up to the rest of the Ducati gang. One thing that's probably skewing it is obviously Sepang, after all that testing, was, you know, grip paradise. And I think we see the best of Marco Bezzecchi come out when the grip isn't so good. We see his adaptability, his, you know, the stuff that makes him the darling of Casey Stoner and a lot of other people, you know, that natural talent, the adaptability, the throttle control, all that kind of stuff. So he's not in trouble, but it's sort of, he can't be even not a one-trick pony. He can't be limited in his arsenal at all if he wants to go for the championship this year or anywhere near. He can't be. He has to be good everywhere. And he wasn't really good in the Sepang test. He was, I think it would be fair to say, objectively worse than Fabio Di Giannantonio. And that can't fly if you want to be really in the championship mix, and if you want to try to give VR46 a miracle championship that honestly you weren't that far off of last year, and with the extra year of experience, but also increased competition. It's always going to be a long shot, but it's being made a longer shot right now.
Yeah, there was a very slight degree to which Bez and his title bid last year was boosted by other people being injured, but that was a pure title bid on merit from a rider and team doing very well. The downside of that is the expectations that then kick on and produce an even better one this season, which is going to be a tall order regardless, and starting a little bit on the wrong foot in testing isn't going to help that. And then, of course, there's also the element of where's Bez going to be in 2025. He was very keen to stick with VR46 and pick comfort over factory spec for this year, but that's not going to be forever, is it?
He has to be looking at a factory seat for 2025, and the reality is that's outside of Ducati. We've already had conversations with Ducati management who are hopeful to have Pecco Bagnaia confirmed maybe even before the season starts. And the reality is that within the pecking order of likely teammates for him, Bezzecchi is fourth because he's behind Bastianini, he's behind Jorge Martin, and he's now behind Marc Marquez as well. I think increasingly we see a situation where people are going to have to go elsewhere. People are going to have to look at alternatives. Yamaha might be an option, but that depends on what Quartararo does, because I think Rins is there for the foreseeable future, at least through this contract cycle. Aprilia is the one, obviously, that presents the most opportunities, but they're going to take, I think, the loser of the Martin Bastianini row. They're going to take whichever one of those two doesn't get a factory Ducati seat, and then that means that Bezzecchi is looking at the Pramac seat he turned down again this year at Ducati, or limited options. Now that I've laid, I didn't think about this going into answering this question, but I've laid it all out in my head now, and there is as realistic a prospect that he ends up remaining at VR46 as he does go into a factory seat for 2025, albeit potentially in a different manufacturer, which could change things up a bit, and that might provide the impetus for him to stay if VR46 say announce they're going to Yamaha or KTM, and that presents a different path forward. But yeah, I think that his future is the most unknown in terms of rider market questions right now of the guys that are going to be top 4, top 5 of the championship.
I think there's a couple of extra factors to consider, but we don't yet know how they'll play out. I mean, what Marco Bezzecchi does have over any other Ducati candidate is that he's Pecco Bagnaia's bestest bud. So if Ducati decides that it wants to consolidate completely around Bagnaia and cater to his every whim, then I think Bezzecchi gets a boost there. Although at the same time, I don't know if Bagnaia wants his bestest ever bud Bezzecchi in the same team on the same bike, flashing that natural talent that sometimes allows him to win races by absurd margins in modern MotoGP. I think he'd be fine with it. Pecco Bagnaia doesn't seem like the kind of guy who'd stop Marco Bezzecchi from going into the works Ducati team, certainly, but he also does not seem to be the kind of guy who would really try to push him there. He seems to just generally like stability and like established ways of working together without really pulling his weight that much and being ready to take in any teammate. I think he's just kind of cool like that. The other thing is, I do think he has a really good Aprilia shot, and I think back to, remember when Andrea Iannone was banned and Aprilia was in that mad dash to try to figure out any way to fill a seat, and going to absolutely Moto2 riders, MotoGP testers, I think, just really trying to figure something out. I think Marco Bezzecchi was one of the riders that they were most interested in. He was still a Moto2 at that point.
Oh, yeah.
And he made a lot of sense then as a young rider to pursue, but if they rated him highly then, I mean, I bet they still rate him highly. There's been nothing in MotoGP to rate him less highly. No, you'd be more convinced of Marco Bezzecchi. So I think they could make quite a decent play for him, and I do think that he's justifying a factory seat the way he's been. in MotoGP. So Aprilia does actually make a lot of sense to me. But it's a question of how all of that Ducati madness shakes out, and whether everybody really is waiting for Ducati to make its mind up one way or the other on who partners Pecco Bagnaia in 2025, or whether some of the dominoes will start falling before, like somebody comes to Jorge Martin with a massive mega money offer, and then he removes himself from consideration there, that kind of thing.
It's also, for me, a question of how mercenary Aprilia are prepared to be. And don't get me wrong, I think that they should be prepared to be, which is not something I normally advocate for, because I quite like teams that, you know, look after their riders and look after their people. But Maverick Vinales and Aleix Espargaro aren't doing it right now. They've taken that bike to a point, and it's time for new blood. And I know Espargaro has talked to us actually about retirement potentially being in the cards, and then dialed it back shortly after with a run of good form. But, you know, for me, I think Aprilia need to make him a big money offer to become their test rider and lifelong ambassador. And then really they need to look elsewhere on the other side of the box as well, because Vinales is, it's just not coming, is it? He's still effectively in the same point he was in 18 months ago with that bike, where it's just almost close enough, but not good enough.
Well, this completes my list of riders and teams with things to sort out in the final test, and that is basically 3/4 of the Aprilia lineup. You know, we highlighted Espargaro as a very impressive performer in the first test, and frankly, he needs to be given lifelong mayorship of Noale and allowed to run the town and have a mansion there and whatever, lots of bikes. But yeah, he's given so much to that project and made such a big contribution to turning it from this laughing stock that we used to look at going through rider after rider and scrabbling for drug ban replacements to this really impressive front-running team against the resources odds. But yeah, time to get a new talisman in to actually make this bike a title contender. There's people who could fill that role on the market, and that means that the other three riders, Vinales, Raul Fernandez and Miguel Oliveira, they really go into the season with quite a lot of pressure to prove that they should still be part of Aprilia long term.
Can you imagine going into the 2027 MotoGP season with a new set of rules and a bike developed by Enea Bastianini and Marco Bezzecchi? They would start the season as genuine title contenders. Like, that would be such a strong outfit with a bike that is going to close the gap to Ducati dramatically. That would be a really good place to be. And honestly, I think that as we go into this next contract block for 25 and 26, factories are going to be looking to the road change in 2027 and thinking at that point, you know what, we need a rider that can develop a bike. We need someone who is going to help build likely our 850 to replace the 1000 cc's. And that's going to be a factor. That for me should absolutely be a factor in Aprilia wanting to have Aleix Espargaro on a full-time testing contract for 2 years behind the scenes. But it should also be a factor in factories that, you know, want to start the season the way that Honda did with the V5 in 2002.
We've heard from Massimo Rivaldo also recently, and he sort of struck a similar sort of line to Pit Byrer, maybe slightly less committed to stability, but still emphasizing lineup stability and Aprilia's commitment to its four established riders. I think I don't know if that commitment survives first contact with the rider market frenzy, and I especially like all the people we've talked about. They are very attractive options. I should also mention, I think Fabio Quartararo's on the market, so if you can get Fabio Quartararo somehow, if you can convince Fabio Quartararo that, you know, yes, this isn't the best bike in MotoGP, but it can be enough for you. I mean, you've made it. I don't know. This might be a long shot, but we've heard very, like, in recent days, our colleagues at motorsport.com reported they had an interview with Fabio Quartararo, and he said that he's had exploratory initial contacts with other MotoGP factories. What factories might that be if not Aprilia? And if Aprilia can make it, like, I think they're ideal. I think what I would do is I would maybe talk to Aleix about the retirement test roll thing and consider replacing him with Marco Bezzecchi. Or if that doesn't work, consider replacing Maverick Vinales with Marco Bezzecchi, but keep Vinales otherwise. But if you could get Fabio Quartararo, then that overrides everything. I think he is still potentially the one rider on the MotoGP grid who you can bet on overcoming not the best bike, but a bike that's just good enough to scratch and claw his way to a fairy tale title for Aprilia. He also might get immediately really mad by anything, and it might end up being annoying, but it might end up being the best thing ever.
Yeah, he'll still ride really fast while he's doing that, so you can cope with that.
I mean, it's worth saying that the Aprilia is not the best bike on the MotoGP grid, but it's probably the second best, as opposed to the Yamaha that's fourth in that rankings by a long way.
It's second or third.
It's second or third. It's close to the close to the KTM, but then there's a big drop to Honda and Yamaha. So even to go from a decent, even to go from what he's got now to go to that bike, he's going to see a huge step forward. It's the moving from economy to business class as opposed to the extra little bump from business to first.
So here's what I do, fam.
I fly a lot. I use aircraft analogies.
Of course you would. Here's what I do if I'm Massimo Rivola, right? It's Qatar. It's Friday evening. I make sure that after Fabio Quartararo qualifies 14th, my face is the first face he sees. And maybe with a picture of the Aprilia or whatever in my hand, make sure that happens.
No. You forget that Qatar's a lit schedule. What he's doing right now is he's changing his hotel booking to be in Quartararo's hotel so that they can bump into each other at breakfast on Saturday morning. Just, at the buffet next to the automatic pancake maker machine. Fabio, good morning.
Yeah. And Fabio won't have slept at all.
Yeah. I love how we started today thinking we'd talk about riders with things to prove in a test, and then we've just gone straight full on 2025 rider market for basically the whole episode. And
we're the worst.
No, I don't care. I used to ban you from doing this when we had races to talk about, but we're in 2024 now. The deals are going to be done. The conversations are happening. What is it? 18 out of 22 riders out of contract, or half the satellite teams not with a proper manufacturer contract for next year yet. Everything. Or nothing. Hopefully not nothing. We like things changing. Everything could change. So that's why when we start talking about test performances, test moods and that sort of thing, everything plays into who's going to have a job where next season. And I make no apologies for that. I love it. Thank you, Val. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, listeners, for your company on this one. Just a reminder, we have Marc Marquez as our special guest on next week's first of two episodes. One will be about the test on Tuesday as well. If you've got a question for Marc, we will slip a few in of yours as well. So email it to podcast@the-race.com, either in text or voice note form, and we will squeeze in a couple of the best, we promise. We really, really look forward to being back in your ears at the start of next week on Monday with our exclusive chat with Marc Marquez. Speak to you then.
The Athletic.